Hi, this is Dr. Goldwire. Today's lesson will be about internet sites. And I'd like to start talking about those sites that are sponsored by the government. The first one is the FDA. The mission of the FDA is to protect, promote, and enhance the health of the American people. The FDA has four main areas of oversight: ensuring that foods are safe, wholesome, and sanitary. Number two, human and veterinary drugs, biologic products, and medicinal devices are safe and effective. Number three, cosmetics are safe. And number four, electronic products that emit radiation are safe. One more useful part of this website is access to approval documents, including current package inserts. You can access this information at the FDA website. So let's go ahead. I included a link in your notes, and let's click on that link and investigate the FDA website. So the link brings you right to the Drugs at FDA, which are the FDA-approved drug products. So for example, let's type in Zithromax. And if we choose the hyperlink to Zithromax, we have a listing of all the Zithromax that were approved by the FDA. Now if I just click on one, for example, I'll click on the capsule, which was the first link. It will bring you to another screen where Zithromax and provides drug details. For example, I have that the company is Pfizer, that the original approval date was November 1st, 1991, and at that time this chemical structure for azithromycin was a new molecular entity, and it was given a priority review. I also can get to approval history, letters, reviews, and related documents. I can get to the label and other important information from the FDA, such as safety warnings. So I wanted to click on approval history, letters, reviews, and related documents. So as you can see, I get a listing of all the information that was put forth about azithromycin. So if I click on one, such as the review here for the new or modified indication, it will bring me to the advisory committee meeting in which this information was presented. And you can see here on the left I have an approval letter, a labeling at that time, a medical review, a chemistry review, a statistical review, microbiology review, pharmacology review, some administrative documents, and some correspondence. When I'm reviewing a new drug or one that was being potential for formulary approval, I'll often come to this FDA site and take a look at what the medical reviewers and the statistical reviewer has said about the drug. But if I go back to the FDA and I choose the tab Drugs, you will see a lot more information available. For example, you can see a listing over here to the right for drug shortages. And then here is the drug information. Again, this is the Drugs at FDA that we were just at. The Orange Book. The Orange Book is our book of equivalence. So it basically tells you bioequivalence between brand name and generic names. And the National Drug Code Directory. You can also see drug recalls, get the latest information from MedWatch, which is safety information from the FDA. You can see approval information, drug approvals, biological approvals. And then they have some areas or headers here. You can navigate the drug selection. Again, the drug approvals and databases, that's the Drugs at FDA. You can see safety information, guidance and regulatory information, preparedness. And then there's other information here for consumers, for healthcare professionals, for industry partners. There's news and announcement, and there's drug safety, and then program areas at the bottom. So what I find interesting on the FDA site are the advisory committee documents, which I showed you. They also have a place for bad ads where a healthcare professional can submit a bad ad or pharmaceutical advertising. They have Daily Med, which I believe you may be a little bit familiar with. That's package inserts, which we will go over in just a bit. Again, drug recalls and drug safety availability. Drug shortage information is here. You can find information on medication errors and MedWatch, the National Drug Code, the Orange Book, package inserts, and other topics that are timely going on today. So I do recommend the FDA site. Again, I go here for approval documents and if I wanted information about drug shortages and drug recalls. So the next site I wanted to highlight was the Center for Disease Control and Prevention, which is the CDC. The CDC is primarily concerned with the prevention of disease as well as regulatory activities which include monitoring laboratory standards, evaluating occupational health hazards, and maintaining surveillance programs on preventable conditions. The CDC also compiles statistics on disease occurrences and death from all causes in select cities, makes recommendations on immunizations, provides valuable information on drug therapy for public health problems, and certain biologic and drugs may only be obtained through the CDC. The CDC also lists travel information and provides up-to-date information on vaccinations. So why don't we go and visit the CDC? So again, the web address is just www.cdc.gov. And you can see it opens to a page, and of course right now is the 2014 Ebola outbreak and information and updates. You can see at the top we have diseases and conditions, healthy living, travelers information, emergency preparedness, and then more topics. What I'd like to highlight is this travelers information. So if you click on the travelers information, you have destination, travel notices, find a clinic, disease directory, yellow book, and more. You see you have more information about what's new, the enterovirus, D68, public health grand rounds, reducing sodium, and Ebola. If we keep going down, you see more information. And here's what I wanted to show you about the CDC. You have science, learn about the CDC, and then the latest from the director. Whenever you're at a website and you're not familiar with it, I always suggest coming to the very bottom. Usually it's at the bottom, and you want to click the About button. So here you can find information about the site's mission and vision, organization, funding. So it's very important whenever you're at a website to remember to find that About button so you can learn about the organization that is sponsoring the website. So one thing about the CDC is they produce the Morbidity and Mortality Weekly Report, which is the MMWR. This is a journal in which, again, published by the CDC, that tracks disease outbreaks here in the United States, but it also tracks mortality. So this is where you can find deaths, births, and similar information. So if you want the latest recommendations, again by the CDC's Advisory Committee on Immunization Practices, ACIP, I would definitely come to the MMWR, and you can use the search feature to search information there. So here we can see a new report out on HPV recommendations. So again, to get back home to the CDC main site, you just click the CDC button. And I did want to show you just a little bit about the travel information. So for travelers and clinicians, you can see here, all you do is select on one of these drop-down buttons the country, And then it will bring you to, like if I chose Austria, and then I'm just going to not choose any of these. They're optional. And then if I hit go, it will bring me to a page and it will tell me the vaccinations I need to travel to that area. I just want to warn you to be careful and read all the information. A lot of times only part of a country requires vaccination and not the entire country, especially for your malaria prophylaxis. But that's a very good place. Again, this is the vaccine, traveler's health, and knowing what vaccinations are needed when traveling to other countries. So get in the know, as I mentioned, the traveler's health information, and then the MMWR, which is exceptional, especially for vaccination information. The next website sponsored by our government is the National Library of Medicine. And the National Library of Medicine provides information about drugs through a wide variety of sources. And in Appendix A, I left you a listing of databases provided by the National Library of Medicine. They're also in this little box here. You can see that you have a drug information portal, you have ToxNet, DailyMed, which is where you can get package inserts. And then you have a slew of other databases: AIDS Info, Clinical Trials, I love clinicaltrials.gov, LACMed, LiverTox, Medline Plus, Pillbox for pill identification, PubChem, PubMed, and RxNorm for drug names. So let's just take a look at the National Library of Medicine. So this is the home page for the National Library of Medicine. And then here are those databases. I mentioned some of these. Now, if you're going to use PubMed, you need to go through the library so it can link to the journal articles that the library subscribes. But in the National Library of Medicine, you will find Medline Plus, and this database was developed for the consumer. It's an excellent database, and it provides a medical encyclopedia and medical dictionary, easy to use and understand tutorials on common conditions, tests and treatments, health information in Spanish, extensive information on prescription and non-prescription drugs, health information from the media, and links to thousands of clinical trials. Again, this is Medline Plus, and I highly recommend this when you're not able to get into any of the library databases. Of course, you should use those first. But you can send your patients to Medline Plus to search for information. So again, you can see here you have information on health topics, drugs and supplements, and videos and other tools. So again, that is Medline Plus, a part of the National Library of Medicine. One of the other sites I really find myself using from the NLM is the one dailymed.gov. But if we choose all NLM databases, we'll get a listing of all the databases the National Library of Medicine promotes. And if we do DEEF, we will get DailyMed. And I just picked this first one, DailyMed. Again, if you click on the link, it will take you to DailyMed. And DailyMed is a repository for package inserts. So there are specific regulations concerning what must be included in the drug label regarding its content and how it works, as well as its proper administration and handling, side effects, and proven effectiveness and safety. So in 2006, the FDA developed product labeling guidelines. And you will find package inserts, like I said, right here in DailyMed. So if we do type in Zithromax, and hit enter or the go button, we have package inserts that come up for Zithromax. And you can see here we have repackagers, which we don't want. We want the original packager, which is the brand name Pfizer. Now we have to be careful we choose the right one. So this first one is the injection. This second one is also the injection. And then we have a tablet and a powder for suspension. So let's click on the tablet and powder for suspension. And I'll just show you a little bit about Daily Med. You can see tabs here for the labeling sections. So oftentimes I will direct students to package inserts. Again, you can access the package insert, and one of the things I like in the package insert are the descriptions. A lot of times you can find this in the drug databases. But if you thumb through the PI, all PIs now, because of the 2006 ruling from the FDA, are the same. They have the same headers. You can find information here. I especially like the how supplied, if you're ever wondering how it comes, although this can also be found in the drug databases. So I just thumb down to how supplies, and you can see there are 600 milligram tablets. They're film coated, and they're packaged in bottles of 30. So Daily Med also provides a label, which is very nice. You can see what the packaging looks like. And you can see the inactive ingredients. If you got a question for some reason if the tablet contains lactose, which most of them do, certainly come to the package insert to look that up. It says the inactive ingredients for the powder for suspension is sucrose, so you may get a question about that. You have flavoring here, banana, cherry. And again, I usually go to PIs sometimes when I want to find excipients. So I lastly wanted to show you the revised date. So this PI was revised April 2014. So I do like Daily Med to find current package inserts. So again, it's important you understand package inserts and what they are, because they are a source of drug information. So the package insert is intended for and written for the healthcare professional. And note that the package insert may also include other material in addition to the package insert. Newer medicines have a two-part package insert, and the first part highlights prescribing information, but the second part is also the full PI. Some PIs for the older products cover the same types of information as the new products, but are arranged in different sections. So one of the sections in the PI, you notice it's the indication, and this means the FDA-approved indication. Of course, physicians are allowed to prescribe medications how they seem fit, so they are allowed to prescribe off-label, or which means not according to the FDA-approved indication. And my traditional students have trouble with this, but it's acceptable to prescribe off-label, especially with certain drugs that have been used for a long time in these conditions. Beta blockers post-MI is an off-label use. So again, just because a drug is prescribed off-label doesn't mean it's wrong. We can look in our drug databases. Micromedics is an excellent source to look for off-label drug uses, although Facts and Lexicon also list off-label drug uses. The PI has a section for contraindications, and this refers to a specific situation the medicine should not ever be taken. The warnings just warns. You want to take into consideration benefits versus warnings. They are different than contraindications. We have black box warnings. Specifically, a boxed warning gives a brief explanation of any contraindications or serious warnings that may be associated with death or serious injury. There is a section for precautions. Again, this is precautions that a healthcare professional should take when prescribing or considering to prescribe that medication. There is information for the patient and patient counseling information. And sometimes there's a medication guide. This document is maybe separate from the full PI. And the medication guide or patient labeling may include certain information that is necessary to prevent serious side effects, information about a known serious side effect of the medicine, and then directions for use of the product that are essential to its effectiveness. You can also get a listing of drug products that have medication guides at the FDA website, and I left you that link in your notes. So now, switching gears from government agencies, we're going to talk a bit about pharmaceutical companies. And pharmaceutical companies should be one of the last resorts that you use for drug information. Major pharmaceutical companies usually have a toll-free telephone number or will collect phone calls. And relying on these companies for drug information should be done only after recognizing the limitations. Pharmaceutical companies may not always provide a citation or reference claim made in advertisements and promotional literature. Some claims may be based on unpublished data, which are not readily available. There is also a tendency for information to present positive aspects of the drug without providing a fair balance of its disadvantages or lack of clinically significant advantages over competitor products. Companies may also present a different interpretation of data than drawn by persons with expertise in that particular specialty area. Pharmaceutical representatives also have benefits and limitations as a source of drug information. They can assist in obtaining relevant product information from the company and can provide expert scientists or clinicians for speaking engagements, reprints of important articles. However, you have to take into consideration the training of these representatives. They may only tell you part of the story. The main limitation to using the pharmaceutical companies is that they generally have to talk to labeled uses. So, if you wanted information that has to do with off-labeled use of a drug, the pharmaceutical company representative will not be able to help you. So some general considerations about using biomedical resources on the internet. The internet contains many excellent drug information sources. One of the first things to evaluate is the web address of your source. Standard domain names in the U.S., such as EDU, that stands for an educational institution. GOV stands for a government agency. COM stands for a commercial organization. MIL is a military site. NET is a network site. ORG is an other private organization. And INT is an international site. Outside the U.S., you may notice country codes such as UK, AU, CA for Canada. And when using these search engines, read the instructions provided with each search engine in regard to your operators, whether you can use the Boolean operators, delimitators, and rules to help your search efficiently. It's very important that you evaluate the website. Who runs the website? Can you trust them? What does the site say? Do its claims seem too good to be true? When was the information posted or reviewed? Is it up to date? Where? Where did the information come from? Is it based on scientific research? Why? Why does this site exist? Is it selling something? Again, when you come to a website that you are not familiar with, always start with that About button, usually located near the bottom. or the top, but that will tell you a little bit about the organization sponsoring that website. You can also get external reviews. You can find out a lot from these external reviews to the websites. You can use Alexa.com to find out how popular the website is. And here you simply type in the website name in the search field and click Get Details. So let's go ahead and click on the Alexa.com link. So at Alexa.com, you'll notice a search bar. So you just enter the website you would like information on. So let's just try Medline Plus. And it wants a valid site, so www.medlineplus.gov. So we can see that how popular is medlineplus.gov. Global rank, oh, it's over 1 million. How engaged are visitors to Medline Plus? Page views per visitor, 1.6. Daily time spent on the site. Audience demographics, most of them are female. And then, if available, it provides you more information. So again, this Alexa.com is just another source where you can get information about websites. Lastly, you can always search the Better Business Bureau to find out if the organization has ever been in any type of trouble with regard to the business they operate. Health on the Net Foundation is a nonprofit organization that helps guide the public and health professionals through the medical information available on the internet. This site offers many tips on evaluating internet sites. It also provides a rating system for health-related websites. If the website is found to be in compliance with HAN code, the site receives a certificate. This certificate only states that the website developers are in compliance with basic ethical standards with regards to presentation of information, and so the readers know the source and the purpose of the data they are reading. So the example I would say to check out is drugs.com. So if we go to drugs.com, and again, if you go to the bottom, you can see the HON Health on Net certificate code here, stating that this website is in compliance with the health code standard. Okay, so this again is an example of one of the websites I have listed on other websites, and it's drugs.com, but we will talk about that in just a moment. So created in 1995, HON Health on Net is a nonprofit, non-governmental organization accredited to the Economic and Social Council of the United Nations. For 15 years, HON has focused on the essential question of the provision of health information to citizens, information that respects ethical standards. To cope with the unprecedented volume of healthcare information available on the internet, the HON Code of Conduct offers a multi-stakeholder consensus on standards to protect citizens from misleading health information. HON is funded by the State of Geneva, several European projects, the French National Health Authority, and the Provision Foundation. HON is also supported by the Geneva Hospital since its inception. The other thing I wanted to bring to your attention are other information of consumers, sources of consumer information. So you may want to become familiar with some of these because your patients may be using these sites. So this is not all incomprehensive, and I have additional resources for you in Appendix C. I don't advocate for any of these sites or disadvocate for any of these sites. I just want to bring them to your attention and let you know what's out there. Now there are some resources, many actually, available for healthcare professionals. And I like one called PharmGuide, which is a listing of free drug information resources on the web. It was started by a group from the American Academy of Colleges of Pharmacy, AACP. Categories include adverse events, alternative medicine and dietary supplements, brand names, availability, compounding, consumer health, and a wide variety of other topics. So if you want to visit PharmGuide, just click on the link I provided for you. And you would be brought to the PharmGuide homepage. And you can see that there are links here of various types of free drug information available to you. So let's just click on the compounding tab just to show you. And the one here is Compounding Recipes Index from Sick Kids, Hospital for Sick Children, which is affiliated with the University of Toronto. So then you just hit your back button to go back. And there's information on, again, let's just click on therapeutic use. And it brings you to other sites, Common Drug Review Database, clinicaltrials.gov, which again is run by the National Library of Medicine. Excellent site for those drugs that are in trial right now. Drug Information Portal, again, this is from the National Library of Medicine. Drug Digest. This is information from Gold Standard, which also does clinical pharmacology. Drugs.com, which we just visited. And yet it pulls its information from AHFS, the FDA, Micromedics, and MedFax. Drugs at FDA, which we reviewed. And it also lists some Canadian sites. LiverTox, which again is from the National Library of Medicine, the Orange Book, which is from the FDA, and PubMed Central. So again, PharmGuide was developed as links to free drug information. Another site I like is called GoodRx, and this provides information on cost of medications specific to geographic locations in the United States. So again, goodrx.com. This is and then you just put in the drug name. Let's just put in Ambien. And then I'm in Denver. So it will bring up the cost of Ambien. And they priced out 30 tablets at 10 milligram. And I like this if I'm ever asked questions about cost, which isn't often, but once in a while I do get those questions. So goodrx.com is an excellent source. I left you some websites in Appendix D. And here are some questions that you could answer using these websites. We have the Federal Aviation Administration, questions about what medications pilots can take. I have quite a few sources for foreign medications, South African electronic package inserts. I've drugs at FDA.gov for drug approval information. We have Traveler's Health. Do you need malaria prophylaxis when traveling only to Cape Town? Cape Town, the city. You're not going outside the city. Do you need malaria prophylaxis? JNC guidelines. No, JNC-8 just came out. We can go to the National Heart, Lung, Blood Institute, and that is sponsored by the National Library of Medicine or our government. The most current recommendations for treatment of cancer. The NCCN or NCI, again, government agencies. American Academy of Pediatrics for any pediatric specific illnesses. Medical calculators. I like medical calculators, and the Martindale Center is excellent for a wide variety of calculators. I know a lot of you probably use Global RX, which is an okay site also. So you can take a look at these other websites. Again, they're in Appendix D. There's quite a few of them there, and it's just for your information. So now I'd like to talk a little bit about evidence-based medicine. Evidence-based medicine is a process to identify and use the best available scientific evidence to guide decision making. The scientific evidence is integrated with clinical judgment and the patient's unique circumstances to provide the best clinical decisions. Clinical practice guidelines can be evidence-based or consensus-based. Guidelines provide clinical practice recommendations with the intent of improving patient care and outcomes. Guidelines are not intended to provide clinicians or decision makers with black and white or cookbook answers for patient care. Nor are they meant to replace clinical insight and judgment. Guidelines are meant to provide clinicians with as much evidence as possible to make informed decisions. Guidelines are closely tied to the process of quality improvement in medicine through their identification of evidence-based best practices. Such practices can be used as quality indicators. Examples include the proportion of acute MI patients who receive aspirin upon admission to a hospital and the proportion of heart failure patients with a depressed ejection fraction treated with an ACE inhibitor. Routine measurement and reporting of such quality indicators can produce selective improvements in quality, since many physicians prefer not to be outliers. Insurance companies may not reimburse for care that is not recommended by current practice guidelines. The purpose of clinical practice guidelines are to describe appropriate care based on the best available scientific evidence and broad consensus, to reduce inappropriate variation in practice, to provide a more rational basis for referral, to provide a focus for continuing education, to promote efficient use of resources, to act as focus for quality control, including audit, to highlight shortcomings of existing literature and suggest appropriate future research. Figure 1 illustrates the balance in recommendations from clinical practice guidelines. You balance desirable and undesirable outcomes, and that determines and influences the strength of the recommendation provided to that guideline. For example, if you have a highly undesirable effect, a highly desirable effect, and it outweighs the undesirable effect, this means for a strong recommendation given to that action. Whereas if you have a highly undesirable effect and it outweighs the desirable effect, this is evidence for a strong recommendation against a given action. Critically evaluating clinical practice guidelines is required. Guidelines differ in their quality of content. There are more than 2,500 guidelines, many of which are consensus-based rather than literature-based. Consensus-based guidelines may be influenced by expert opinion rather than based upon scientific review of the evidence. There are many types of grading systems used to assign levels of evidence and recommendation to practice guidelines. Generally, these systems grade on two aspects. The first is strength of recommendation, and the second is the quality of the evidence. In general, recommendations are graded from A to C, with A being a higher grade than C. Quality of evidence is rated from 1 to 3, with 1 being a higher quality of evidence, such as literature and outcomes from randomized controlled trials, rather than 3, which often represents expert opinion. Some guidelines add a plus sign or a minus sign that stands for either highly recommended or not recommended. Two routinely used grading systems are highlighted below: the strength of recommendation taxonomy, or SORT, and the grading of recommendations assessment, development, and evaluation, or the GRADE criteria. Figure 1 describes the appropriate grade according to the evidence provided, which is based upon a balance between desirable and undesirable effects. And again, that was the figure I just reviewed. And again, for your grade of evidence, you often have to evaluate the desirable effect and compare it to the undesirable effect. The SORT criteria uses 3 ratings: A for strong, B for moderate, and C for weak, to specify the strength of recommendation. A number of factors influence the final grade assigned to the evidence obtained from one or more published study. Factors include quality of evidence of the individual study, types of evidence presented in the study, and consistency of outcomes presented. In SORT, Grade A reflects a recommendation based on consistent and good quality patient-oriented evidence. Grade B reflects a recommendation based on inconsistent or limited quality patient-oriented evidence. And Grade C reflects a recommendation based on consensus, usual practice, opinion, or disease-oriented evidence. The quality of evidence per SORT criteria first appeared in the American Family Physician in 2004. Newer grading systems have adopted SORT to include patient-oriented outcomes, such as patient preferences. So you can see in this example, assessing quality of evidence, the study quality, level 1, is good quality patient-oriented evidence. And they give you an example of the diagnosis, validated clinical decision rule, a meta-analysis with high-quality studies, a high-quality diagnostic cohort study, treatment and prevention screenings, and then for prognosis. And you will discuss each of these literature types, hopefully, in your literature evaluation course. But I wanted to just familiarize you with these criteria for clinical practice guidelines, because part of what I want to show you is how to find clinical practice guidelines. So once you find them, you have to be able to interpret them. The other criteria that you will see used is called GRADE. And the GRADE working group began in 2000 as an informal collaboration of medical practitioners with an interest in addressing the shortcomings of present grading systems. The GRADE scheme classifies recommendations as strong or weak, according to the balance of benefits, risk, burden, and cost. The system classifies quality of evidence as high, grade A, moderate, grade B, or low, grade C. GRADE takes into account the study design. Studies are limited to randomized controlled trials and observational studies that include cohort studies, case control studies, and interrupted time series analysis. The study's quality, the criteria appropriate for the study type. The consistency, reviewers assess whether study results are consistent with those from other studies. And the directness, reviewers assess whether the subject's interventions and outcomes are similar to those of interest in the target population. A number of medical organizations endorse the use of GRADE criteria, including the American College of Chest Physicians, the American Thoracic Society, the British Medical Journal, the Cochrane Collaboration, the Endocrine Society, the European Respiratory Society, Infectious Disease Society of America, and the World Health Organization. A difference between GRADE and other approaches is categorization of expert opinion. GRADE specifically acknowledges that expertise is required for interpretation of any evidence, but considers that opinion as an interpretation of sometimes unsystematic evidence, but not as a form of evidence. So whenever you see a criteria that is based on expert opinion, you should just note that that was indeed based on opinion and not scientific published data. So I have a note of caution in here that there are many different scales for grading clinical practice guidelines. The same evidence and recommendation could be graded as 2B, C+1, strong evidence, strongly recommended, depending on what system is used. So one of the first things you need to do when you are assessing a guideline or the possibility of using the guideline is to determine how they developed their criteria and graded their recommendation. The Institute of Medicine and the Agency for Healthcare Research and Quality publish standards for developing trustworthy clinical practice guidelines. I have shortened these here, but it includes establishing transparency, which means that everything that is done to develop that practice guideline is noted by the reader, that it is transparent. The process by which the guideline is developed and funded should be detailed and publicly available. The guidelines need to manage conflict of interest. Prior to selection of the guideline development group, individuals being considered for membership should declare all interests and activities potentially resulting from conflict of interest with development group activity by written disclosure to those convening the guideline group. In other words, those persons coming together to develop guidelines need to let the guideline group know whether or not they have been paid by any of the medications that are prominent within that guideline, or whether they receive any funds, outside funding for speaking or any type of other engagements. Whenever possible, this guideline group should not have members that have a conflict of interest. In some circumstances, the guideline group may not be able to perform its work without members who have conflict of interest. And in such cases, the chair or co-chair should not have a conflict of interest. Number 3, the guideline development group composition should be multidisciplinary and balanced, comprising a variety of methodological experts and clinicians. Number 4, clinical practice guidelines systematic review. Developers should use systematic reviews that meet the standards by the Institute of Medicine's Committee on Standards for Systematic Reviews of Comparative Effectiveness Research. So again, you want to have criteria for use of systematic reviews. And you want to have criteria set up on how exactly the review will be accomplished. Number 5, you need to establish evidence foundations for and rating strength of recommendation. The group needs to, for each recommendation, have an explanation of the reasoning underlying that recommendation, and including a clear description of potential harms and benefits. The group also needs to have a summary of relevant available evidence, description of the quality, quantity, and consistency of the aggregate available evidence. The rating system of level of confidence should be included, as well as a strength of recommendation. A description and explanation of any differences of opinion regarding that recommendation should also be made. Number 6, articulation of recommendation. Recommendations should be articulated in a standardized form, detailing precisely what the recommendation is and under what circumstances it should be performed. Strong recommendations should be worded so that compliance with the recommendation can be evaluated. Number 7, external reviewers should comprise a full spectrum of relevant stakeholders, including scientific and clinical experts, organizations, patients, and representatives of the public. Number 8, updating. The guideline should be updated when new evidence becomes available. The date of the pertinent systematic evidence review should be noted. Literature should be monitored regularly following the guideline publication to identify the emergence of new, potentially relevant evidence and evaluate the continued validity of the guideline. The appraisal of guidelines for the research and evaluation instrument was developed specifically to aid clinicians in determining the quality of the practice guideline. I have included this tool for you in Appendix E of your notes. I'd like to highlight an example of guidelines, and this was a case involving the Infectious Disease Society of America. The case was taken from the Institute of Medicine in 2011. Clinical Practice Guidelines We Can Trust, which was a book that the IOM published. In the fall of 2006, Practice Guideline, the Infectious Disease Society of America, addressed the controversial diagnosis of chronic Lyme disease. Quote, "There is no convincing biologic evidence for the existence of symptomatic chronic Burford infection among patients after the receipt of recommended treatment regimens for Lyme disease. Antibiotic therapy has not proven to be useful and is not recommended for patients with chronic more than 6 months of symptoms after recommended treatment regimens for Lyme disease." And that was given a strength of recommendation of E1. Here, the E denotes a recommendation strongly against an action, and 1 refers to evidence from 1 or more properly randomized controlled trials. Concerned the new IDSA guidelines would impact insurance reimbursements, advocacy groups immediately objected, citing concerns about the IDSA guideline development group's bias and an incomplete review of the data. In November 2006, Connecticut Attorney General Richard Blumenthal himself, personally active in the support of Lyme disease advocates, conducted an antitrust investigation against the IDSA, alleging that a broad ramification of its guidelines require it to use a fair, open development process free from conflicts of interest. At the culmination of its investigation, the Connecticut Attorney General's office questioned the objectivity of the process by which the Guideline Review Committee was selected, the lack of opportunity for interested third parties to provide input, and conflicts of interest of committee members, despite disclosure in the guideline document. In addition, the AGO expressed concern that several IDSA committee members had concomitantly served on another panel for the American Academy of Neurology, which discussed and issued a related practice parameter about chronic Lyme disease in 2007. Refuting these claims, the IDSA maintained that committee members were chosen based on clinical and scientific expertise and that the guideline represented a thorough, peer-reviewed analysis of all available literature and resources. Although the guideline does not describe processes for committee selection and guideline development, the document did grade both the strength of its recommendation and evidence quality using a standard scale. For nearly 18 months of investigation and $250,000 in legal fees, the IDSA entered into a non-punitive agreement with the Attorney General's office, voluntarily committing to one-time structured review of their 2006 guidelines. According to the IDSA president, Dr. Donald Portitz, put to rest any questions about them. In summer 2009, the new committee, with oversight of a jointly appointed ombudsman, met to gather additional evidence for their guideline review, and shortly thereafter unanimously agreed to hold up its 2006 guideline recommendations. Clinical practice guidelines have become a significant tool in the healthcare with focus on evidence-based practice. These guidelines fit well with the emphasis of continuous quality improvement. Guidelines have the potential to assist healthcare providers in medical decision-making and ultimately improve the quality of care, improve patient outcomes, and make more efficient use of resources. Significant advances have been made in the methodology to produce valid guidelines. Information technology and greater understanding of optimal methods for implementation of guidelines will maximize their effect to improve quality of care. Pharmacists' active involvement in preparation and implementation of evidence-based clinical practice guidelines is vital. A thorough understanding of evidence-based methodology will prepare the pharmacist to participate in this process. A drug information trained pharmacist is an ideal person to help prepare and or implement evidence-based clinical practice guidelines. Now I'd like to turn to sources of guidelines. There are many sources of clinical practice guidelines. Many are developed by medical associations and can be very helpful in clinical practice. These guidelines are developed by experts in their field. Most nationally known medical associations have developed guidelines. You can search for specific medical association guidelines on their home website. For example, medical associations like the American Academy of Pediatrics have developed their own guidelines. You can access guidelines at their website, www.aap.org. In Appendix F, on those useful websites, I listed some of those include medical associations. So here's some examples of guidelines on the internet. And for example, let's just go to the American College of Physicians, American Society of Internal Medicine. And I would just take a look at the overview of the website. And I would probably go under clinical information, and I do notice one of the first choices is guidelines. So when I click on guidelines, I'm taken to current guidelines, guideline statements, or best practice advice. So if I click on current guidelines, I am taken to a listing of clinical practice guidelines put forth by the American College of Physicians. So again, you can do this with most medical societies have a website, and most of them do have a tab for guidelines. Another source of getting guidelines is the National Guideline Clearinghouse. The National Guideline Clearinghouse provides an index to various clinical practice guidelines. NCG is an initiative of the Agency for Healthcare Research and Quality that is part of the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services. NCG was originally created by AHRQ in partnership with the American Medical Association and the American Association of Health Plans. The mission of NCG is to provide an accessible mechanism for obtaining objective, detailed information on clinical practice guidelines and to further their dissemination, implementation, and use. Components of the NCG include structured abstracts about the guideline and its development, a utility for comparing attributes of two or more guidelines in a side-by-side comparison, synthesis of guidelines covering similar topics, highlighting areas of similarity and difference, links to full-text guidelines where available, and or ordering information for print copies, an electronic forum for exchanging information on clinical practice guidelines, their development, implementation, and use, and an annotated bibliography on guideline development methodology, implementation, and use. Let's take a look at the National Guideline Clearinghouse. So if I just go to guideline.gov, that will bring me to the National Guideline Clearinghouse. It's a public resource again for evidence-based guidelines. So if we just type in hypertension, Now, one thing you should know about the National Guideline Clearinghouse is that it is optional for authoring bodies to submit their guidelines to this site. So you will not find all guidelines on this site. That is very important for you to realize. And you can see here the sort engine doesn't sort necessarily by year, because I have a 2012, well, this is revised in 2012. And then I have a revised in 2011. So make note that there are two dates. This fourth one here was revised in 2014. So it is not sorted necessarily by year of publication. It is sorted here by relevance. Means that the system thinks that those guidelines are relevant to the topic hypertension. So I'm just choosing one, high blood pressure in expert panel on integrated guidelines for cardiovascular health and risk reduction in children and adolescents. So it brings me to a guideline summary, and you can see I have a Jump To tab, which will provide me basic information about the guideline, including scope, methodology, recommendations, evidence support, benefits, contraindications, implementation, IOM quality categories, identifying information and availability, and a disclaimer. So you can tab down and get the broad idea about these guidelines. I also have a tab on guideline classification and related content. So again, the National Guideline Clearinghouse provides a brief summary of the guidelines. It will give you a link to the full text, but it is not a full text version of a guideline. So near the bottom you'll see guideline availability, and that's where you can get a link to the full text. So this is available from the National Heart Lung Blood Institute, which again is a part of our government. And you can see when I thumb down, you can see the recommendations, the guidelines definitions for evidence-based statements. Again, this is very important. The evidence quality or grades of the evidence, A, B, C, D. Their bottom grade here is expert opinion. So it is nice to use the Guideline Clearinghouse to get a brief overview of a guideline. As you may know, some of these guidelines are, can be upwards of 100 pages. So it's nice to have a brief overview. And you can get that from searching the National Guideline Clearinghouse. Keeping in mind, not all guidelines are on this site because it is voluntary for the guideline author to submit to the National Guideline Clearinghouse. So you can also search the primary literature for guidelines. Many guidelines have been published in peer-reviewed medical literature and therefore can be located in Medline. A variety of search techniques may be used, but the most efficient may be to search for the practice guideline in the publication type field of the record, or to use mesh term practice guidelines in conjunction with other terms for the specific disease or therapy of interest. Additional publication types that may be searched include terms Consensus Development Conference, Consensus Development, National Institute of Health, Guideline, Meta-analysis, and Review, Academic. The key differences with systematic reviews compared to the old forms of narrative review articles are that the systematic review begins with a focused clinical question. It involves a comprehensive search of the evidence, uses criterion-based selection that is uniformly applied to include evidence in the review. It performs rigorous critical appraisal of the studies chosen and provides a quantitative summary of the evidence. Literature search strategies have been published for locating systematic reviews. Remember, we can use the Cochrane database for systematic reviews and meta-analysis. Other databases we can use include our drug databases. Dynamed. Dynamed has adopted taxonomy to allow you to easily see if the recommendation is warranted. So for example, if we go into Dynamed, so again, I do like Dynamed. I do like the guideline recommendation because every disease monograph is going to have a header for guidelines. So let's just put in diabetes. And if we search diabetes type 2 in adults, and we choose that monograph, you'll see over to the left, guidelines and resources. If we click through to the guidelines, you will get guidelines. So the first note here is comparison of 3 guidelines, ACE, ADA, UMHS, on the screening and management of microvascular complications in diabetes. It can be found at the National Guideline Clearinghouse. So again, Dynamed is taking us right now to the National Guideline Clearinghouse, which you can visit. Then we see international guidelines are listed for diabetes, and then United States guidelines, which I wanted to get to real quick. American Diabetes Association, American Diabetes Position Statement on Standards of Medical Care in Diabetes. So let's go ahead and just look at the executive summary can be found, and we just click on that link. So when I click on the link for the article, I get the executive summary of the guidelines, and you can see current criteria for the diagnosis, testing for diabetes in asymptomatic patients. You can see here they have a level of evidence here. Screening, and again, this is the summary, so I'm not going to probably find my definitions here. I would have to go to the full text of the article to determine what these recommendation levels mean. But again, that was in Dynamed, and I do suggest that you do use Dynamed. You put in the disease state you want, and then you go down to the guidelines button and hit the guidelines for whatever you're interested in. Another excellent source of guidelines is MD Consult. Let's go back to our library. And then MD Consult to the left, if we choose MD Consult / First Consult, has a button here, Guidelines. And it lists its guidelines in alphabetical order, by topic, by specialty, and by authoring organization. So, for example, I see a recent guideline, low-dose aspirin used for prevention of morbidity and mortality from preeclampsia, from the United States Preventative Services Task Force. So if I want these guidelines, I can click on the link, and it will bring me to the guidelines. So again, MD Consult, excellent source of guidelines if you know a topic, a specialty, or the authoring organization. So again, if we want to put in hypertension, which will probably have quite a few guidelines associated with it, we can click the topic hypertension, and we can get all the guidelines up. And you can see that MD Consult does put their guidelines in order by date. And then you have authoring organization off to the right. Another excellent source for locating guidelines. You can also use UpToDate to locate guidelines. However, it doesn't have a comprehensive list of all guidelines. If guidelines are noted, it will state so in the disease monograph. It's kind of the same with Micromedics. As part of DrugDex, you need to go to the detailed drug monograph and look under therapeutic uses, and you may find information on guidelines. I don't generally use Micromedics for locating guidelines. Again, I like to go to MD Consult and Dynamed. Facts and Comparisons has recently added, I think within the last couple years, a tab called Clinical Evidence. This Clinical Evidence tab will direct you to guidelines if they are available, and a summary of those guidelines. Same with Lexicomp. They have recently added a clinical practice guideline tab. And again, Lexicomp will just provide you with the citation and the link. I've had good luck with Lexicomp getting the full text, but again, if you can't get the full text, go into the library site and search by journal name. So once you find the guideline you're interested in, you need to make sure to interpret it correctly. As I mentioned before, all guidelines contain methodology on how the author determined the strength of recommendation and the quality of evidence. You need to find that in the article itself to see how that strength of recommendation and quality of evidence is defined. So an example I like to use is from the American Academy of Pediatrics. And I left you the link here. This is about the management of sinusitis in children aged under 18 years. So again, if I'm looking at their introduction, seeing, oh, here we go. One of the first figures is a level of recommendations. So if I click on in a new window, I'll get this figure larger. So you can see that an evidence quality of A is derived from well-designed RCTs or diagnostic studies. And then the preponderance of benefit or harm, again, if you can think of those scales that we saw in figure 1, there's a strong recommendation for that evidence. A B, RCT or diagnostic study with minor limitations. Consistent evidence from observational studies. We can see that this could be a strong recommendation or a recommendation because of the way it falls within the balance between benefit or harm. Data from observational studies is a recommendation. And then expert opinion is an option. That's a level D. So I think my example here is the use of amoxicillin with or without clavulanate as first-line treatment when a decision has been made to initiate antibiotic therapy for acute bacterial sinusitis. So again, this has to do with the choice of agent recommended for a child who presents with symptoms of acute bacterial sinusitis. And this is evidence quality B. So again, if we remember this figure, evidence quality B was from RCTs or diagnostic studies, overwhelmingly consistent evidence from observational studies. So you will find data in the discussion of the key statement, and it may reference an RCT, but we don't know if all of this data was from an RCT because that recommendation also includes data from observational studies. So again, it's very important to locate how the recommendations are defined, and then to read further about it. So again, this key action statement 4 is a quality of B, and it is a recommendation. So be certain you can locate how the authors define the quality of evidence. And as you advance through your school, and you will be asked to read guidelines as part of your coursework. And it's imperative, therefore, you understand the limitations as well as know how to critically analyze these guidelines. In conclusion, it's very important for you to know the sources of information available to you through the internet, and also be able to efficiently gather information about clinical practice guidelines. I just want to thumb down and show you the appendix. Appendix A are sources from the National Library of Medicine. Again, these are free sources of drug information for you and also for patients. Appendix B are questions to answer when evaluating a website. You need to evaluate the website according to credibility, for content, for disclosure, timeliness, feedback, design, external reviews, and overall impression. Appendix C are popular consumer health information and social media sites. Just a listing of a few sites that I have found patients use. Appendix D are websites that you may find beneficial for your practice, and these are organized by disease state, government organizations, healthcare companies, infectious disease, international drug information, medical information sites, statistics, medical writing, medical safety and adverse events, natural products, oncology, organizations, pharmaceutical sites, manufacturers, and veterinary medicine. Most of these are free, but some require a subscription in which you need to set up a username. And then Appendix F here are sources of clinical practice guidelines. So again, I like to use Dynamed and MD Consult. I will go to Facts and Lexicomp once in a while, and UpToDate and Micromedics. And then I do use National Guideline Clearinghouse when I need to and I can't find it in MD Consult or in Dynamed.